welcome you back for the second major event we want to look at as it pertains to this timeline of end-time events. Last time we were together, we looked at the Messiah of the church, and we saw how Christ came right on time. Now, this second major event involves the time of the church. We call it the church age, when the church was birthed back in Acts chapter 2 until the period of time we're living in now. Now, in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, Peter had quoted directly from Joel chapter 2, verse 28, and Acts chapter 2, verse 17. He said that God would pour His Spirit out on all flesh in these last days. And young men would see visions, and old men would dream dreams. Now, according to the book of Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 38, Ezekiel also places his prophecy regarding the hook in the jaw during these last days in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 8, and again in verse 16. He talks about these latter days, which leads many to believe that the first Magog invasion in Ezekiel chapter 38 happens either at or prior to the rapture of the church, and we'll talk more about that in our next session together. The point is, we are living in what's called the last days. In fact, not only Peter, but Jesus himself talks about these last days in Matthew chapter 24. It's called the Olivet Discourse. In verse 3, it says, "Now as he, Jesus, sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?'" Now the disciples asked Jesus two questions. Jesus answers their second question first, dealing about the end of the age, or these last days that we're living in today. And he said in Matthew 24:5, he said, "Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famine, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." Now, Jesus gives us many things that will transpire in these last days. Earthquakes, famine, pestilence, disease, and boy, we are seeing that like no other time in the history of mankind. But what I found very interesting is in verse 7, because Jesus talks about nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And oftentimes we lump these two ideas together. However, the word nation is the word ethnos. It speaks of people groups. So one people group will be against another people group, and we, of course, are seeing that today. However, the word kingdom is the word basileia. It carries the idea of strength or power or rule. In fact, it carries a spiritual connotation. In John chapter 18, verses 36 and on, Jesus said that my kingdom is not of this world. So it's speaking of a spiritual kingdom. You say, okay, Clark, I get it, but why is that so important? Well, because for years we've been hearing about what's typically referred to as the Middle East conflict, the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis. However, according to Jesus in Matthew 24:7, this is not a conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis. No, it's a conflict between the Muslims and the Jews. This is a spiritual battle, not a battle in the realm of the physical, though it manifests itself in the physical realm. We often think it's about land, but the truth of the matter is it has nothing to do with land. You say, Clark, are you sure? Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, back in 1917, under the British Mandate, we have what's called the Balfour Declaration that divided the Middle East up into two sections. 80% of the land was given to the Arabs, 20% of the land was given to the Israelis. The Arabs received 12 million square miles of oil, and the Israelis received 8,000 square miles of rocks. Such a deal. Israel's full of rocks today. It's clearly not about land. In fact, in 1948, after the War of Independence, more land was given. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, more land was given back. In 1977, after the War of Attrition, the entire Sinai Peninsula was given back. In fact, in 2005, the entire Gaza Strip was given back to the Arab community. And did that result in peace? Absolutely not. No. It wasn't about peace. In fact, over the years, I've had many opportunities to meet with many dignitaries in Israel. I've met with then Vice Prime Minister Moshe Ya'alon. I've met with the Consul General of Israel, General Giora Island, Major General Uzi Dayan, Brigadier General Shimon Aram, and many others. And in every single sit-down meeting I've had with these men, they tell me that the battle is not about land, that it's a spiritual battle, and this from secular politicians and military people. It's amazing, which tells you and tells me that there will not be a two-state solution. I personally believe that we will not see a two-state solution for at least two reasons. Number one, if the Arab community gets their own state, they're going to be responsible for their own resources, their own infrastructure, roads, sewer, water, electricity, gas, hospitals. All of these things Israel is now supplying to them. They'd be responsible for it. They'd be responsible for their own actions militarily. They couldn't blame attacks on Israel on rogue terrorists. Their government would be responsible. There would be a line, a border that requires visas to go back and forth, and they don't want that. So there'll never be a two-state solution for that reason, first and foremost. But I believe there's another reason why there will never be an end to this conflict, and that's because God said so. You know, in Genesis chapter 16, verse 11, God said that Ishmael is a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against every man. So I believe this will be a lifelong conflict. You say, okay, Clark, I get that, but where do we fit into this as it pertains to America? Well, that's a good question. Most scholars believe in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 13, America could possibly be the young lions of Tarshish, because there are a group of nations who do not come against Israel. And presumably we are one of those. Now, for the last 8 years, I've had my doubts because our relationship with Israel has been strained. But hopefully now we're going to see a change in that. And the reason I'm hoping that we as America continue to support Israel is because of God's blessing that He mentioned in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. Speaking of Israel, He said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Well, next time we're together, Lord willing, we will take a look at the third major event on our time frame, and that is the rapture of the church. So until then, may God richly bless you.